The wind whips through the trees. The moon hangs heavy in the sky. Somewhere in the darkness, a small plane soars effortlessly through the night. The engine hums softly, the only sound breaking the silence. Behind the controls sits a man. He's fast asleep. In March 2007, a Cessna 172 was spotted flying above Minnesota. The pilot, no license, no training, and, well, he wasn't even awake. So how did this sleepy man end up in the cockpit? And how did he land the plane safely without waking up? Welcome back, everyone. I'm here. Today we're exploring the bizarre case of the sleeping pilot. You won't believe how he took off. First, let's meet Sam Baker, a 31-year-old man from Minneapolis who works as a janitor. Sam had a strange habit, sleepwalking. According to Sam, he'd been sleepwalking ever since he was a teenager. One minute he'd be peacefully sleeping in his bed. The next, he'd find himself in a strange location with no recollection of how he got there. Some of his sleepwalking incidents were rather harmless, like when he'd wake up in the neighbor's garage or on the dock. Other times, it was a little scarier, like when he once woke up on a dock in freezing cold temperatures. He was barefoot, his pajamas were soaked, and if he hadn't gotten himself back home right away, he might have died from exposure. Sam tried everything to stop sleepwalking, but nothing worked. Then, one night in March 2007, Sam's life changed in ways he could never have imagined. It was a cold, clear night in Minnesota. The temperature sat around 28 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about -2 degrees Celsius. For some people, it was just a bit chilly. For others, it was a bit too cold. That's why most people were tucked away in their warm beds at 2:38 a.m. But Sam, well, he was sleepwalking. As always, he didn't know where he was going. But this time he ended up at a local flight school, a place he'd never been before. Surveillance cameras rolled as Sam, barefoot and in his pajamas, strolled confidently into the dimly lit hangar. He was alone. No one had seen him leave his house, but as the camera rolled, it seemed like Sam knew exactly where he was going. He walked over to a Cessna 172, opened the door and climbed in. Now, this is the crazy part. There were no alarms. No security guards, nothing to stop him from getting in, and once inside, he was even more clever. There were multiple ways he could have started the plane. He could have turned on the radio, engaged the autopilot, and made the plane take off without anyone knowing. But that's not what he did. Instead, according to the police report, he started the engine, taxied to the runway, and then he took off. Perfectly, silently, as if he'd done it 1,000 times before. What happens next is beyond belief. No one knew what to do. After all, the last thing anyone expected was a sleepwalking man to hijack a plane. By the time the authorities realized what had happened, Sam had been in the air for almost half an hour, but now that he was gone, they needed to bring him down. At 2:52 a.m., military radar picked up an unauthorized aircraft flying erratically in restricted airspace. They sent out a broadcast to all nearby airports, but no one had seen the plane. Meanwhile, the military started scrambling fighter jets to go intercept the plane. Their main priority was to ensure the safety of others. But as they approached, they saw something strange. The plane was flying smoothly. Its navigation lights were on. There was no erratic behavior, and certainly no sign of distress. There was only one reasonable explanation. The pilot was awake. But this wasn't the case. We know that because the man in the plane was still sleepwalking. Sam continued his journey, unaware that he'd become the center of a massive manhunt. The military wanted to intercept, but they also wanted answers. Why was a plane flying in restricted airspace without permission? Who was piloting it? How could they bring it down without hurting anyone? Unfortunately, there was only one way to find out. At 3:25 a.m., two F-15s closed in on the plane. Each fighter jet had two pilots, a driver and an observer. As they approached, one of the observers contacted the control tower. "We have visual," the observer reported. "We see the plane and we can confirm there is a single pilot in the left seat." With that information, the military decided to keep observing and wait for the plane to land. But where would it land? The answer came sooner than expected. After 90 minutes in the air, Sam started descending. The plane slowly lost altitude, its lights reflecting on the dew-covered crops below. As it approached the ground, it lined up perfectly with the runway, touched down gently, and then slowed to a stop. Throughout the landing, the fighter jets followed closely behind, ready to intervene if anything went wrong. But it became clear that Sam was bringing the plane down perfectly. The fighter jets retreated, giving Sam space to taxi to the end of the runway and then turn off the engine. As the sun began to rise, casting its golden glow over the horizon, the world started to wake up. But no one noticed except for the military personnel. They saw a lone figure emerge from the cockpit. He was still barefoot. He was still in his pajamas. And after looking around in confusion, he collapsed. That's when the medical team moved in. They rushed to Sam's side, checking his vitals, asking him questions, trying to understand what had happened. But this was a man who had no idea where he was or how he got there. He didn't remember anything. To make matters worse, the medical team couldn't find any drugs or alcohol in his system. There were no clues to explain his behavior, and that's how it stayed for several days. The authorities brought Sam in for questioning, but he had no answers for them. The medical professionals ran test after test, trying to find something, anything, that could explain how a sleepwalker could not only operate a plane but land it safely. Finally, after a battery of tests, including an MRI, they've got a diagnosis. Dr. John R. Jordan, one of the doctors who examined Sam, explained, "We found that our patient had a very rare form of sleep disorder. It's called complex behavior disorder. People with this disorder can get up, walk around, and even operate machinery while asleep. In other words, the man who had hijacked a plane and landed it safely was a victim of his own subconscious. His mind had taken control to protect him from harm." Dr. Jason Weiner, another expert, added, "It's like an out-of-body experience. Your consciousness is somewhere else. Your mind takes over and does what it needs to do to keep you safe." But this raises more questions than it answers. How could Sam, someone with a history of sleepwalking, suddenly start flying a plane? And why did his subconscious mind decide to land the plane safely instead of crashing it? Unfortunately, these questions don't have definitive answers. All we know is that Sam had taken off from a flight school and landed in an empty field 30 miles away. When the news broke, it was everywhere. Newspapers, TV shows, podcasts, documentaries, they all picked up Sam's story. Some praised him as a hero. Others said he was lucky. And then there were those who thought it was a hoax. Experts were divided. Some said it was a medical miracle. Others said it was a hoax. But one thing was certain. All the evidence pointed to the same conclusion. In March 2007, a sleepwalking man took off in a small plane, flew for 90 minutes, and landed it safely without waking up. He was barefoot, he was in his pajamas, and he had no idea how he managed to do it. We don't know why his subconscious mind decided to land the plane safely, but maybe that's the least important question. Maybe the real question is this: if the human mind can fly a plane in its sleep, what else is it capable of? Thank you for watching, and if you liked this video, check out the others.